In a stunning 6-3 decision, the Supreme Court today ruled that a North Carolina legislative challenge would not go forward, which would have fundamentally changed the way the elections are running in the United States of America. At its base, this case was based upon a challenge presented by the North Carolina state legislature, arguing that because the Constitution lays out that states alone are in charge of overseeing their own electoral processes, that any review by the Supreme Court of the state of North Carolina, by the Attorney General of the state of North Carolina, by the State Elections Board of North Carolina, should be null and void, and that sole power should lie with the state legislatures in order to determine how elections should be run. The Supreme Court rejected that argument. The reason this is significant is because over the course of the last 15 years or so, Republicans have concentrated on consolidating power in state and local offices. During the Obama administration, Republicans won 1,044 elections nationwide, taking over state legislatures across the country. If this challenge had gone forward, fundamentally, those Republican state legislatures would be able to nullify elections, redistrict and change lines. They'll be able to change election dates, impose poll taxes. This would have fundamentally gotten rid of Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, which has already been weakened by Shelby v. Holder in 2014. This decision by the Supreme Court, along with the Louisiana decision on redistricting yesterday, as well as the Alabama decision on redistricting a week ago, as the most significant upholding of voting rights that we've seen in nearly 40 years in the United States of America. This is a crucial decision, particularly coming from a Republican court. Remember, this court has 3 justices appointed by Donald Trump: Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, as well as Clarence Thomas, Thomas Alito, and John Roberts. And they are the court that has decided to uphold voting rights in a way that even the Obama court a decade ago decided Shelby v. Holder would not do. So the reason that this is so important is that it indicates that voting rights will survive and live another day. This takes all doubt away of what may happen in 2024, where Republicans may attempt to submit their own ballots of fake electors as they did in the 2020 election. It re-solidifies the ability of states that have progressive-leaning Supreme Courts to have a veto over things that happen in the state legislature. So the reason I want everyone to pay so much attention to this is because the right to vote, if not protected, goes away. We've seen attack after attack, gerrymandering districts, such as in the Alabama case and the Louisiana case. Those cases took representatives away from African Americans that deserve to be in Congress. In some, the Congress gave us 2 new Black Congresspeople in the last 2 weeks. This is a momentous occasion. Joining us to discuss this is founder and managing director of T. Booker Strategies, Tamia D. Booker. Ms. Booker, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
I'm doing great. Can you talk a little bit about the North Carolina case today and why this is so important for people to understand the significance of this decision?
Yes, absolutely. So the first time I was here, I actually talked about this. We talked about the implications of this had it ruled the other way. And you are correct in that this is very significant because the implications would have been horrendous. And it's very shocking, like you said, and exciting to know that at the very least, that this extremist theory was rejected. Our voting rights still need to be protected, and we still need to push Congress to still pass the Voting Rights Act. What's important here to note is that this right-wing extremism, this theory has been projected in many states across the country. And we saw those rulings, as you mentioned, very important at Alabama, Louisiana, and now North Carolina. In North Carolina, they were trying to do everything that you mentioned. And what's important here to note is that this theory was struck down. Correct, yes. And that this doesn't mean that gerrymandering is completely struck down as well. It just means that the state legislatures cannot legislate and dictate federal elections the way they'd like. Correct, right? And so to that end, we need to make sure we stay on Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act and protect us. And so that part is extremely important here. And so in this theory and understanding before that they were really trying to get away with having only 4 representatives in Congress that would potentially be Democrats. With the amount of African American and Democratic leaning voters alone in North Carolina, we know that that was not the case. And so it's exciting yet surprising to see here, but we need to be important and we need to note the importance and stay vigilant because this is happening across the South. And yes, Alabama, Louisiana, North Carolina, we'll see this pop up, but it is important to note that. And so let's continue to stay on Congress to make sure the Voting Rights Act reauthorized, and let's continue to make sure that fundamental rights as voters are not stripped.
People think of this as being kind of an arcane or peculiar topic that lawyers and academics talk about, but we can just look at what happened after Shelby v. Holder in 2014 and the way that American politics has changed since then. So you could make the argument that we never have a Donald Trump as president if Shelby v. Holder had gone the other way. Can you talk about the significance of these additional seats in both the Louisiana and the Alabama case, in addition to the ruling from today?
Yes, it's very exciting to note that both of these seats that we know that will have more representation in Congress in both Alabama and Louisiana. We saw in Alabama in particular, as that because I was a part of the Doug Jones movement, I like to say in 2017, where we saw Black voter turnout was significant. And in Alabama, where I worked on a campaign there for mayor, there is a significant Black voter population down there, and to have a state like that with only one representative in Congress, and to see how those gerrymandering was insane to just see. And so it's important when you think about Congress as a whole, and when we are frustrated with many things that are not passed legislatively, we know most likely these 2 seats that will be drawn will be Democratic seats. That changes how Congress will be, right? Like, we have a very slim majority in Congress right now. We have a Republican-led Congress who barely could get along, right? We saw how many times it took for them to even support a speaker. So when we think about our next congressional session and where we will be as a country, these 2 additional Democratic Black seats are very significant in how we will change our country. And so it's important when we think about the right to vote and making sure we are out here voting and how we can change many things for us. And so that is why both of these seats are very important. And that's why what is happening in North Carolina is also extremely critical. So it's exciting to see both in Alabama and Louisiana. There are a lot of people down there that have been working on voter turnout and engagement, and to see that we will have some more representation there, and Black representation. And who knows what that will bring as the years come, as there could possibly be even more congressional seats drawn there.
What does it say about the Supreme Court that it appears, instead of the traditional liberal versus conservative split that we've seen going back and forth for the better part of a century, as now we have a tripartite system? On the one hand, you have the 3 liberal justices. You have Kagan, you have Ketanji Brown Jackson. You also have the other Obama, or Sotomayor. Then then you have the far conservative wing of the party with Alito, Clarence Thomas. Then you have the Roberts wing of the party, and along with Gorsuch and seemingly Amy Kavanaugh, that seem to be very centrist on these issues. Can you talk about what that might mean going forward, to have a Supreme Court where the same court that decides the Dobbs decision also decides to protect voting rights? What does that mean going forward?
Yes, I think it's really interesting because I think you broke it down very well, where we looked at this as the liberal versus conservative, and I think there's the liberal, there's the extreme, and then there's the centrist. I think it'll be really telling as we look at these cases moving forward. When Alabama came, I barely read it because I was like, my heart was broken because I knew it was going to go the other way. Then I looked at it again and I was stunned. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see the changes that will be made on certain ways. And I think there's also a way to view this, right? Especially when you even look at the North Carolina case. If these were Democrats, you have to look at it in that way too. They wanted to make some extreme gerrymandering rules as well. They may have felt that would have also been unconstitutional, right? Because yes, and so there has to be a standard set, and I believe that's where this ruling came from today. Is that this cannot be the standard that we set for either party in power. We have to make fair lines that have to be drawn when it comes to voting rights, and I think that's important across the board. So if we're going to protect our democracy, then we need to protect our democracy democracy, regardless of party. And I think that is what ended up happening today. And you saw that alignment, with the exception of the extreme, to me, the extremists of the court. And so I think that's what we're going to see. I think when it comes to certain fundamental issues with both parties that are controversial and down the line, I think it's going to be interesting. But I do think when it comes to some of these issues that are critical to the democracy, I think we'll see some more rulings similar to what we've seen over the last couple of weeks.
Absolutely. And I think that it bears to mention that two of the justices who are on that extreme MAGA wing of the Republican Party that vote against the voting rights, that vote against everything else, are two of the justices that we know have wealthy sugar daddies that take care of them. You have Clarence Thomas and his sugar daddy. You got Justice Samuel Alito and his sugar daddy. So when we take these people who are being paid basically for their votes, we take them out of it, it seems that there's a consensus on the court that's important going forward. And I think this case, this North Carolina case, may be just below as important as Marbury versus Madison. Reason being, the Marbury versus Madison established the principle of judicial review. This case upholds the concept of judicial review when it comes to elections, saying that the state Supreme Courts can overrule state legislatures when they violate the rights of individuals. That is something which is not written into the Constitution the same way that judicial review in Marbury versus Madison wasn't written in. However, it does write it in through the courts, saying that even if you have the most insane Marjorie Taylor Greene legislature, you still have the opportunity to go to the Supreme Court and receive justice. Thank you so much, Tamia, for joining us. Thank you for the conversation.